There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from saying too much, from feeling the invisible pull to explain, to clarify, to open up every corner of your heart just so people don't misunderstand you. You speak, not because you're loud, but because silence feels like a risk. Like if you don't say it now, they'll write the story without you in it. And maybe they will. But somewhere between defending your intentions, retelling your experiences, and sharing your every thought in hopes of being known, you start to feel less known, less rooted, less whole. Because every time you speak out of fear, fear of being judged, fear of being left out, fear of being invisible, you chip away at the part of you that's meant to be sacred, private, whole and untouched. We live in a world that worships noise. Post more, share more, prove more, say what you feel, say it fast, say it louder, and maybe you've done that. Maybe you've said it all. And still, you weren't heard the way you hoped. You weren't seen the way you needed. You weren't protected the way you deserved. So now, there's a quiet ache beneath all your explanations, a soft knowing that whispers, this isn't working anymore. Maybe you've been praised for your openness. People say you're brave for how much you share, how transparent you are, how emotionally fluent you've become. But what if, in all that sharing, you've started leaking? What if the constant need to speak has slowly drained the power from your presence? What if the one thing your soul has been longing for is not to be louder, but to be quieter? To rest, to breathe, to hold yourself without offering every part away. There is wisdom in silence, a kind of grounded, ancient truth that doesn't have to explain itself. It just is. And maybe that's the energy you're ready to reclaim. Not as avoidance, not as withdrawal, but as alignment. Because when you speak out of alignment, your words don't carry weight, they carry tension. But when you speak from stillness, from a soul that no longer seeks validation, your voice becomes a whisper that moves mountains. You don't need to be known by many. You only need to be deeply known by yourself. Let that be enough. Let yourself stop proving. Let yourself choose quiet, not because you're afraid, but because you're finally strong enough not to need the noise. There's a wisdom that doesn't shout. It doesn't raise its hand or ask to be noticed. It waits. It watches. It listens. And in that stillness, it gathers everything the world misses in its rush to speak. You've probably seen it before, in the person who sits quietly in a meeting but ends up saying the one thing everyone remembers, in the friend who rarely shares, but when they do, it's exactly what you needed to hear, in the leader who doesn't respond to every provocation, only the ones that matter. That isn't weakness, that is mastery. But for those of us who feel deeply, who notice every shift in energy, every unspoken word, silence doesn't always feel like safety. It can feel like abandonment, like invisibility, like a door slowly closing that will never be able to open again. So we speak to stay connected. We share to feel seen. We explain even when no one asks, just to make sure they understand our heart before they misjudge it. But here's the quiet truth you might have forgotten. Not everyone deserves to know your process. Not every space is safe enough to hold your unfolding, and not every silence is dangerous. Some silences are protection. Some silences are power. Some silences are sacred because they give you back to yourself. There's a kind of knowing that grows in quiet. It's the knowing that says, I don't have to be first to respond. I don't have to explain my entire heart to be valid. I can trust what I see, even when I don't say it out loud. Let me tell you a story soft and real. There was once a woman named Raya. She used to answer every message within minutes. She was the first to comfort, the first to apologize, the first to break the silence after conflict, even if she wasn't the one who caused it. Not because she was weak, but because silence terrified her. It reminded her of the cold spaces in childhood where no one spoke the truth, where silence was used to punish, not to protect. So she filled it. Until one day, she didn't. After a difficult conversation, Raya chose silence, not as punishment but as space. She didn't explain her every thought, She didn't send the long message she drafted. She didn't rush to fix the discomfort. And something shifted. In that silence, she heard her own heart more clearly. She felt her boundaries returning. She realized she didn't owe her peace to anyone who couldn't sit with her pause. And the world didn't fall apart. She didn't lose love. She gained herself. That's the kind of silence that heals. It's not empty. It's full of self-trust. It says, I don't need to be loud to be powerful. I don't need to be everywhere to be present. So if you've been afraid of what silence might take from you, let this remind you of what it can give back. Clarity, safety, wholeness. You don't always have to speak. Sometimes you just have to stay and let your silence speak on your behalf. There is a kind of power that doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't dominate the room. It doesn't try to impress or convince. It simply walks in, and people notice, not because it demands attention, but because it carries truth without needing applause. You've seen it, in the quiet one who doesn't speak often, but when they do, everyone listens. In the calm presence that doesn't react impulsively, but chooses words with care. In the person who knows exactly who they are, and doesn't need to prove it. This is not arrogance. It's not performance. It's alignment. Because when you're anchored in your own worth, you don't need to be loud. You become magnetic not by what you say, but by what you hold. But for many of us, that kind of power feels distant. We've been taught to earn our place by speaking up, showing up, giving more. And when that still doesn't lead to recognition, we speak louder, we try harder, we overshare, we overextend, until our presence starts to feel thin, stretched, unseen even when we're everywhere. But what if the answer was the opposite? What if being less visible made you more valued? What if saying less made your voice more memorable? What if your power didn't come from proving but from simply being? Let me offer a moment. There was a man named Elias. He was gentle, observant, thoughtful. In a company full of big personalities and louder voices, he was often overlooked until it mattered. When a crisis came, when decisions had to be made, it was Elias who spoke once, clearly, calmly, without ego, and the room shifted. Not because he shouted, but because his silence had built weight. His restraint had created trust. People leaned in, because when someone who rarely speaks chooses to speak, you know it's not noise, it's signal. Elias didn't hustle for power. He didn't perform to be seen. He simply cultivated depth, and depth always rises. You don't need to dominate space to own it. You don't need to respond to every opinion, defend every idea, explain every emotion. Sometimes, the most powerful response is presence, still, unshaken, certain. When you learn to hold your energy rather than scatter it, to speak only when it matters, to protect your vision from premature exposure, you stop seeking validation. You start creating impact, and people feel it. Because real power doesn't compete. It doesn't beg. It doesn't broadcast. It moves quietly and still changes everything. So if you've ever felt like you have to be more just to be taken seriously, what if the truth is, you only need to be fully yourself and let the silence around you deepen your gravity? Let the words you don't say become the echo they can't ignore. There is a sacredness to words that come from a rested soul, not rushed, not forced, not given because someone else expected them, but spoken because your heart was truly ready. Most people speak to fill silence, to avoid discomfort, to keep connection, even when it feels hollow. But there is another way to speak, a slower way, a softer way, a way that waits until the words carry weight, and not just noise. Because not everything needs to be said, and not everything that's said needs to be said now. You've likely felt the pressure to respond instantly, to defend your feelings before they've fully formed, to explain your boundaries before you've even honored them for yourself, to keep the peace by giving answers you weren't ready to give. And in doing so, something precious slips away, your truth, not because it disappears, but because it's shared too soon, before it had time to root itself in clarity. There is power in waiting, in breathing, in letting your truth ripen quietly inside you, so that when you do speak, you're not just reacting, you're revealing something real. Let me tell you about someone who forgot this and then remembered. Her name was Imani. Imani had always been praised for her wisdom, her calm, her insight. People turned to her for advice, for comfort, for clarity, and because she cared, she gave it always. But over time, she started to feel hollow after every conversation, not because she didn't care, but because she had been pouring from a well she hadn't refilled. She was speaking from exhaustion, not alignment, from obligation, not readiness. One evening, after a particularly draining exchange, she chose something different. She didn't reply. She didn't fix. She didn't rush to soothe. She sat, in silence, in discomfort, in the sacred in-between space where the soul catches up to the mouth. And in that space, something shifted. Her truth clarified. Her emotions settled. Her heart rose to meet her voice, not the other way around. And when she finally spoke, days later, it wasn't just a reply. It was a boundary. It was a knowing. It was a voice that came from stillness, not survival. You are allowed to take that space, to speak only when the soul is ready. You don't owe instant answers. You don't have to match the speed of the world around you. You are allowed to be slow, to be silent, to wait until what you say is truly yours. Because when you speak from that place, people listen differently, not because you demand it, but because your voice carries the calm weight of someone who no longer speaks to be seen. They speak because the silence has passed through them, and what remains is truth. So wait, pause, let your truth arrive, and when it does, let it come out clean, clear, and rooted. Not rushed, not shaky, but whole. You don't have to explain your peace. You don't have to justify your quiet. You don't have to perform your strength to make it real. There's a part of you, the deepest part, that already knows that silence doesn't mean absence. That distance isn't rejection. That stillness isn't weakness. It is presence. It is protection. It is power. But the world may not always recognize that. It may ask for more words, more openness, more visibility. It may confuse your restraint for disinterest, your boundaries for coldness, your patience for passivity. And when it does, you'll feel the old reflex rise again, the urge to explain, to reassure, to soften your truth so it feels more acceptable. But you don't have to do that anymore. You can let your silence be enough. Let your absence speak for you. Let your energy say what your mouth doesn't have to. Because power isn't in how loudly you speak. It's in how quietly you know. You've spent so long translating your soul into words for others to understand. You've spent years trying to sound reasonable just to be respected, trying to sound calm just to be safe, trying to sound humble just to be allowed to exist. But what if you don't need to sound like anything? What if you could just be soft, still, unapologetics? There's a quiet kind of leadership in not needing to be validated. There's a quiet kind of confidence in letting others think what they want while you stay rooted in what you know. And that doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you free. Because the strongest people aren't those who argue the best. They're the ones who no longer need to. They don't fear being misunderstood because their worth is no longer held hostage by other people's opinions. They don't speak to be praised. They speak because truth finally asked to be spoken, not because someone else asked to be entertained. So if the world doesn't understand your stillness, let it misunderstand. You're not here to be decoded. You're here to be whole. And sometimes wholeness is quiet. Sometimes wholeness walks away. Sometimes wholeness says nothing. And still, everything inside you speaks clearly. You don't need to explain your power. You just need to protect it. Hold it. Let it grow inside the silence that no one else sees as valuable, but you now do. And that's where you rise. Not with noise, not with fire, but with the quiet knowing that you don't owe the world a sound when your presence already says enough.